Star Trek Tactical Assault. Let's talk about it. Star Trek Tactical Assault was released on October 26, 2006 for the Nintendo DS in the United States, and developed by Quicksilver Software, who you may remember for their groundbreaking work on Muppet Treasure Island and the Akari Warriors trilogy for the Commodore 64. Okay, you probably don't remember them. The game was published by Bethesda Softworks, and you can tell because they clearly spent some of that ZeniMax media money getting William Shatner to record 10 seconds of super compressed audio.
Space. The final frontier.
Reminds me of another ZeniMax media game that really only wanted to shell out the money for a weekend's worth of voiceover from another famous Star Trek captain.
Let me see your face. You are the one from my dreams.
Tactical Assault places you in the role of Captain Matt something or another on your first command aboard the USS Essex. Say that 3 times fast. Tactical Assault's story takes place within the 23rd and 24th centuries, starting just after the events of Star Trek the Motion Picture. Does any of this really matter? Not really, but Tactical Assault does have some slight branching story paths, with some missions playing out with small differences depending on your dialogue choices, usually resulting in the mission at hand becoming easier, but more often than not, much harder. I found this system to be slightly interesting at first, but ultimately under-realized. While some dialogue choices may earn you a better grade at the end of the mission, and more upgrade points for your crew, more on that later, rarely if ever can diplomacy save the day. And regardless of your choices, missions almost always end up with 2 starships trading phaser fire. This results in a lot of frustrating trial and error, and instead of picking the dialogue choices that might best reflect your command decisions or roleplay options, more often than not, you end up dying in an impossible combat scenario because you picked the wrong options one too many times, until you eventually stumble upon the correct one that enables you to more easily complete the mission. Take this early example. This is the 3rd mission of the game. There's an Andorian freighter under assault from some Klingons, yada yada yada. There's a few different dialogue trees, but none of them really enable you to talk your way out of a fight, no matter what the Klingons attack. It's just really a matter of if you want 1 or 2 ships to attack you, and after several tries, I couldn't handle 2 ships on my own. I suppose theoretically you could win in these situations. Maybe it's like a hard mode or something, and maybe you get more rewards, but I just couldn't do it. It doesn't feel possible. And the game is full of moments like this. You end up feeling railroaded, with the story and dialogue elements just feeling tacked on, like something you have to muddle your way through to get to the end. It's ultimately very disappointing. Where Tactical Assault shines, however, is the combat, particularly if you're playing on the Nintendo DS. As this was a somewhat early Nintendo DS era game, it does make full use of the handheld's touchscreen, mostly to great effect.
I am tired of tapping panels. For once, I want controls that let me actually feel the ship I'm piloting.
Combat takes place in small 3-dimensional sections of space, with the ship being displayed at the top screen of the console, and the controls being displayed at the bottom, though there's no up or down movement. It's all essentially on a 2D plane, simulating Star Trek's naval broadside combat pacing pretty well. You're unable to collide with other ships, you just sort of hover over them, though you can run into environmental hazards such as asteroids or other planets, and these will burn away your shields pretty quickly. The game can be controlled entirely via the handheld's touchscreen, or via the D-pad and shoulder and face buttons, but I find it controls best using a combination of the two. You use the D-pad to steer the ship, and the phaser buttons on the touchscreen to fire weapons once you've lined up your shots. It does lead to a common problem with early DS games, where long play sessions can be somewhat uncomfortable, leading to awkward hand cramps. But this might just be because I'm old now and slowly dying, as I didn't have this problem when I first played the game when it first came out 13 years ago. Though it bears the name Tactical Assault, it leans more heavily on the assault part rather than the tactical. There are some options to control shield and power management, but it's less of a simulation style game, and this stuff's really more of a chore to keep up with during combat. Your starship will have 6 panels surrounding it, each one representing your shields. As you take hits, the shields wear down, leaving you directly exposed to enemy phaser fire or photon torpedoes, and much of the strategy of the game involves positioning your craft to favor your stronger shields to absorb hits, while whittling down enemy shields to do the same thing. There's a lot of turning and shooting. Some stages will allow you to use those aforementioned environmental hazards, such as asteroids or planets, to block enemy fire, or just hide for a second while your shields recharge, but it's mostly a non-factor. It's just more of annoyance than anything else. The combat itself, though, is pretty fun, and you really get a good sense of the pace of Star Trek's combats. And honestly, I think this is one of the best approximations of Star Trek space battles I've ever seen, at least aside from Star Trek Bridge Commander. Your weapons are on a small recharge timer, so you always have to balance making your shots count while being careful not to soak up too much damage on your shields. There is an option to overcharge your phasers, putting all of your available power into one powerful shot at the expense of a longer recharge timer, and deciding when to use this, or when not to, can be a life or death decision in battle. It's incredibly rewarding to whittle down enemy shields, only to get one well-placed overcharge shot that blows them to bits. There is a little bit of balance too between the positioning of your ship. Most of your phasers, at least early on, are set on one of the 4 cardinal locations aboard the ship, and you have to position it correctly in order to make those shots work. So you have to balance not only recharging the weapons, but also making sure that you can actually be in a position to fire them. Again, there's a lot of turning and shooting in this game. Between missions, you can earn upgrade points for your crafts, and this is pretty straightforward. Each crew member represents a different subsystem: stronger shields, faster weapon recharge, stronger weapons, and so on. But eventually, you can upgrade pretty much everything, so deciding what to upgrade and when is just a matter of personal preference. But it can make some of the early missions a bit easier. I find dumping all of my points into phasers to be the most successful strategy early on, but your mileage may vary. The story itself is nothing to write home about. There's some conflict with the Romulans, and the Klingons, and the Orions, and the fate of the Federation. It's all pretty standard Star Trek stuff. But there are some neat twists that I won't spoil. I wasn't particularly captivated by any of it though, and the game obviously just needed some sort of narrative pretense, otherwise it would just be an arcade shooter. It's fine for what it is, but it's nothing you're gonna be thinking about too much afterwards. You do unlock the use of stronger ships as you progress through the story, however, eventually enabling the use of the famous USS Excelsior.
With all respect, Doctor, I'm counting on Excelsior.
Excelsior? Why in God's name would you want that bucket of bolts?
And once you complete the Federation campaign, you can unlock one where you play as the Klingons, and this is actually pretty cool. The missions themselves are different, though the Klingon vessels control mostly the same, and it's mostly the same style of gameplay, just slightly different objectives. The coolest part of this, however, is the controls. They control the same, but the touchscreens actually look a little bit different, and there's some slight variance in that these ships can cloak, whereas the Federation ones can't. I've noticed the Klingon ships also take a little bit more of a beating when their shields are down, and there's some strategy involving when you cloak, when you decloak, and all that kind of stuff. The coolest thing about it, though, is that there's an option within the menu to change the language on the touchscreen controls from English to Klingon when controlling a Klingon ship, and that's actually really cool. It's a nice touch that they didn't need to make. Kapra! As far as the game's replayability goes, there is a skirmish mode, which lets you set up a battle royale of sorts between the game's various factions: Klingons, Romulans, Orions, or the Federation. And you can control one of those various factions if you like. It can be kind of fun to scratch your starship combat itch, but it wears pretty thin quickly. There is also a multiplayer component, but I imagine this would also get pretty boring. It's local multiplayer via the system's wireless feature, and it might be worth doing if you and a friend both have the game, but I can't imagine it's too compelling in the long run. One final note is that the game does have a port on the PlayStation Portable, but aside from having better graphics and sound quality, and ditching the touchscreen controls, it's pretty much the same game. The PSP version is actually a bit more cluttered, as it doesn't have the benefit of the dual screens to take up some of the UI elements, but it really just boils down to preference. I personally like the DS one a little bit better, but I can't deny the PSP one looks a lot more impressive. I will say this game also lends itself pretty well to emulation via PC if that's your bag. The touchscreen controls translate pretty well to a mouse and keyboard, and let's be real, this game is never getting re-released anywhere ever again, so pirating it isn't exactly hurting anyone. And it's not a bad option if you don't have a Nintendo DS handy. Thankfully, if you do have a Nintendo DS, the game can be found for less than $10 on the secondary market. I got mine on eBay for $7.50, and I didn't really even look. You could probably find it for cheaper. Star Trek Tactical Assault is an underlooked but worthy entry into the Star Trek video game pantheon. It's not perfect by any means, but if you're looking for an easy way to bring some Starfleet action with you on the go, it's definitely one of the better options out there, and it's the perfect game to pass the time on a weekend or a short road trip. Definitely check this one out. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out our Star Trek podcast, Into the Wormhole, where we take a Star Trek newbie through Star Trek Deep Space Nine and beyond. New episodes every single Wednesday. And if you're in a position to support the channel, drop on by to patreon.com/wormholepodcast to get early access to our podcast, our videos, and a lot more.